Hi from Iona and me, Joe, at Woolly Cottage. It is the 1st of December. Happy Yuletide coming for the next month until the solstice. I'm going to be doing every day a daily insert of what is in my Advents. Everybody's had theirs now. Some have gone over to America. Some of your gifts and yours are slightly different from the ones for the UK because obviously can't send over sweeties. So I do apologise if you've dipped out some British sweeties. But everything else is included in here. There may be one or two that I found some labels up the stairs when I was tidying up my workshop the other day after the last was sent out. So I thought, well, this is a brilliant way for me to explain what's in the fibres, and I'm going to spin them off as well. And you also got 2 extra parcels for you to open up whenever you want. So spoiler alert, if you haven't opened them up yet, go and do it now. Unless you want to save it for another day, but you'll see exactly what's in them anyway. You've got 2 parcels dated 1 to 12 and 13 to 24. Last year I included wooden pegs and string so you can hang them up like a garland, but I could not find the pegs that were the right size this year, so I haven't included those, but I will hunt for them throughout next year for next year's Advents. So yeah, and you've got Christmas Day one which is wrapped in gold paper. I know there's 1 or 2 out there that have already opened theirs up. What can I say? So yeah, so without ado, I'm going to open up, well, the first parcel that I've already opened up, there was coffee sachet in there with selection sweets. I'll just put that down there. And a niddy noddy that I got from Maria at Hairy Dog Crafts. So everybody that just spinning, you've all got your yard mini niddy noddies. These don't ever put warm items on them. They will move around and bend, and don't put them anywhere near the steam. If you're steam setting your yarn, take them off before you do that because they will bend and disform. But you can actually buy the centre extensions as well from Hairy Dog Crafts if you want to. So those are in there. If you're a felter, you've ended up with some lovely handmade buttons from Hairy Dog Crafts. And you've ended up with some felting swatches, so you can do bits and pieces, because I know there's a couple out there that have never done anything but needle felting, and I just thought it'd be nice for you to try and experiment a little bit. America, you've had some cotton scrim sent over to you as well, so you can just try something a little bit new, maybe do some wet felted scarves or something like that was what I was thinking when I was putting them together. And also in your next one, your little other parcel, I have enclosed. These ones are a little bit different from the ones that you've received, and I've actually got them, can you see, on my art yarn. I've wrapped them around some art yarn I made the other day, battery operated copper wire LED lights. So if you fancied making yourself a garland, or if you wanted to do a knitted swatch and then put the lights through them or something like that and use it as an ornament in your little craft space. What else have I got on this? I've got your battery lights, notepad and pen. And from one of my favourite folklore artists, it's Karen at Moonlight and Hairs. Oh, there we go. I've put in, everyone's got something different, so I did have about, I think it was 4 or 5 different versions of the folklore themes. So that was in with your notebook as well, with teas. So that's that. There are loads of other little bits in the parcels as you go through on the days. I've not included them in mine, but I have written down a list of what I did put in, and I'll put that in. I'll mention that at the very end of Christmas. You have to bear with me. I've got a cold coming back again. It's never really left, and I could sneeze at any moment. The cat and the dog are trying to get my bits. You can have your sweeties later. So I thought every day I will open up, I'll do Vlogmas all the way through, and I will upload them onto YouTube. And I will open up each day and spin. Now there is an old English tradition, well, old Victorian tradition, where at Christmas time everybody would sit around in the evenings, because obviously darker nights, and this is done in Europe as well, where you sit and speak, talk about old folklore stories, or read from the old stories from the Grimm's books, or creepy stories or haunted stories. So on a couple of my videos throughout, I will be doing a voiceover, and it could be 2-part stories, it could be 3-part stories, who knows, but you'll find out as time goes on. And I will be doing some haunted stories and ghost stories, some folklore and things like that while I'm sat spinning with the fire on, so you could just enjoy the theme, because I love reading out aloud and reading stories. It's something that I've just always loved. I used to do it with my kids all the time when they were younger. So without ado, day one. So day one is this lovely lapis. Now all my bats I've thought of different gemstones and the meanings they bring into you, and the different colourings that come in with these gemstones. So this is lapis, and in this you've got loads of blues. There's actually some BFL been carded in there, a BFL lock. You end up with a textured lock. Now this one's a little bit bigger than what you guys have got. I think this one's about 32 grams, but it was what was left over from doing my carding. So this has got merino, Wensleydale, trilobal, bamboo and alpaca. So there we go. So that is day one. So in the lapis there's loads of different tones. There's the deep blues and there are certain purpley tones in there, and there's black in the fibres. So that's what I went with. So you'll notice when you open up throughout the next 24 days that each of the mini bats have all got a sort of theme, and they all have a name, and hopefully you can see where I came up with the idea for those. So I'm gonna readjust you. Let me get the Christmas tree up. See, I'm gonna readjust you. I'm gonna put some wood on the fire, and I'm gonna sit and get some spinning done, and you can join in along with me. I hope you have a really lovely Yuletide or season, whatever religion you go for. Myself, I believe myself to be a pagan, so I'm an atheist, but I do understand the traditions and love the traditions. I'm not really all about Christmas Day. It's more about muckling down for the winter months, keeping warm, being with friends and family. And at the end of the day, that's what's important. It's not always about the gift giving. So I'll see you on the other side. This excerpt is from the author Peter James, who's a spine-chilling author of novels of The House on Cold Hill and The Secret of Cold Hill. He tells us about the spooky real-life experiences that inspired his books. The House on Cold Hill is very much inspired by and modelled on an isolated historic house in the Sussex that my former wife and I bought in 1989, and which turned out to be seriously haunted. It was classically beautiful, rather melancholic-looking Georgian manor house on the edge of the Sussex hamlet. With a long history before being a manor house in the Middle Ages, it had been a monastery, and prior to that there had been a Roman villa on the site. "You'll like this house with what you write," the owner told me mischievously on our first viewing. "We have 3 ghosts." It turned out he was fibbing. The house, we were later to discover, actually had 4. The first one manifested while we were in the process of moving in. I was standing in the front porch on a beautiful spring morning with my mother-in-law, a very down-to-earth lady who was a senior magistrate, but she had a fae to her side, and in what she was very open-minded about the paranormal, and always had a particular recurring frightening dream whenever someone she knew was about to die. From the front door where we were standing there was a long narrow corridor which ran almost the width of the house through an old oak panelled atrium with 4 Doric columns which led through to the kitchen. This atrium was all that remained of the monastery which had originally been on the site, and you could still see the arches of where the altar had been. As we stepped aside to let the removal men leave the house to fetch another item, I suddenly saw a shadow, like the flit of a bird across the fanlight in the interior of the house. "Did you see that?" she asked with a knowing look. Despite the warmth of the sunlight, I felt a sudden chill, and I knew that moment she had seen something uncanny. But I did not want to spook my wife on our very first day in this house. We were both townies, and this was our first move into the countryside. She was already apprehensive about the isolation of the property. The last thing I needed was for her to be unnecessarily scared by a ghost. So I shook my head and I told her I'd not seen anything. But in truth, I was feeling a little spooked. On our first night, it was uneventful, and our Hungarian Pooley dog had been happy and calm. I'd been told that dogs would often pick up any supernatural occurrence way before their owners would, so I took this as a good sign. In the morning, my wife left for work at 8 a.m, and after breakfast I went to my study to resume some work on my third supernatural novel, Sweetheart. Around 10:30 a.m, I went downstairs to make a cup of coffee, and as I entered the atrium on my way through to the kitchen, I saw tiny pinpricks of white light all around me. My immediate reaction was that it was sunlight coming through the window in the far wall reflecting off my glasses, so I took them off, put them back on, and the pinpricks of light had gone. I returned to my study, but when I went downstairs to make myself some lunch, the same thing happened. And again, after removing my glasses and putting them back on again, the pinpricks had gone. But I was left with slightly uneasy feeling. In the afternoon, when I went downstairs to make a mug of tea, it happened again. I said nothing to my wife when she arrived home that evening, and she did not see anything anyway. The next day, around mid-morning, when I was alone in the house, I saw the pinpricks again, and at lunchtime, after lunch I took the dog for a walk, and we'd only gone a short distance along the lane when an elderly man came up to me, introduced himself as our neighbour in the hamlet. You are Mr. James, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, I am," I replied. "You've just moved into the manor 2 days ago. How are you getting on with your grey lady?" he said, with a strange quizzical look that immediately unsettled me. "What grey lady?" I asked. Then he really spooked me. I was the house sitter for the previous owners. In the winter, they used the atrium as a snug, because adjoining the kitchen it was always warm from the Aga. 6 years ago, I was sitting in the snug watching television when a sinister-looking woman, her face grey and wearing a grey silk crinoline dress, materialised out of the altar wall, swept across the room and gave me a malevolent stare, gave my face a flick with her dress, and then vanished into the panelling behind me. I was out of there within 30 seconds and went back the next morning to collect my things. Wild horses wouldn't drag me back there again. I was struck, both the sincerity of the man for his genuine fear, which I could see in his eyes as he told me the story. It truly had made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I returned to the house after our walk, feeling very uncomfortable. I even wimped out of going through the atrium to the kitchen to make my afternoon cuppa, but when my wife came home in the evening, I said nothing, I suppose. I didn't want to believe it myself, and she was still extremely nervous about living in such an isolated house. The following Sunday, we invited her parents to lunch. While she was occupied putting the finishing touches to the meal, I took her mother aside and asked her what exactly she'd seen that day we were moving in. She described a woman with a grey face, dressed in a grey silk crinoline, moving across the atrium, exactly what the old man had described to me. I was stunned and very spooked. Later, after her parents had left, I decided I had to tell my wife. She took it in the pragmatic way that she had of dealing with most difficult issues in life. "You've met several mediums in your research. Why don't you go and ask one of them to come in and see what they find?" A few days later, a medium who had helped me a lot during my writing of Possession came to the house, and I took her to the atrium and left her on her own, as she requested. An hour later, she came up to my study and yet again described exactly this grey woman in this silk crinoline dress, and she explained the pinpricks of light I kept seeing by telling me I was slightly psychic. So while I was not actually seeing the entire apparition, I was picking up some of its energy, hence the pinpricks. I asked her if there was anything I could do about this, and she told me that the apparition was of deeply disturbed former resident of the house and that it needed a clergyman to deal with the problem. I felt a tad cynical about her response, but at the same time I was now feeling deeply uncomfortable in what should have been the sanctuary of my own home. But there was a vicar I knew who I thought would be able to help, and with whom I'd become good friends. At the time he was officially the vicar of Brighton, but with another hat he was also officially the chief exorcist of the Church of England. That wasn't his actual title, which was less flaky sounding. It was Minister of Deliverance, a former monk of 2 sons of medics, a university double first in psychology, and he was far from Max von Sydon's Father Merrin in The Exorcist as you could get. As he was a delightful human being with whom I'd become good friends with, and still am to this day, he is a modern thinker and a clergyman who has had problem with the biblical concepts of God, yet he retains his infectious faith. His views, for instance, on the Ouija board are that far from putting its participants in touch with the spiritual world, it actually opens up Pandora's box of their own inner demons. Even so, I was a little surprised when I cheerfully entered the atrium, stood still for a couple of minutes, and then loudly and very enunciated into the air, "You may now go." He turned to me and said, "There, you should be fine." The above story was only one of the spooky occurrences that had otherwise glorioused the house. As a postscript, I should also add something of the house's history. For much of the 20th century, it was owned by the Stobbart family, most famous member of which was Tom Stobbart, OBE, was a photographer, zoologist and author. A true adventurer, he was the cameraman who climbed Everest and hunted with Hunt and Hillary and took photos of their ascent. Subsequently, he was shot in the knee in Ethiopia and tragically died far too young from a heart attack at the local railway station in Hassocks. One family member was reputedly a strange lady who subjected Tom's sister Anne, who we befriended in the years before she died from a stroke, to such cruelty as a child she was never able to live a normal life or form normal relationships. Was she the Grey Lady in the atrium? During the Second World War, the house was used to billet Canadian soldiers after the war. During the second half of the 20th century, 3 couples brought it and subsequently all divorced. We were the third. Was the Grey Lady in any way responsible? I will always wonder. Take it as you will. Lost my camera there. Right, hiya, back again. So there you go. Just a 10-15 minutes sitting spinning. I've not really gone with any type of structure or consistency. I'm quite happy with this. I'm just going to collect all mine and probably do some sort of weaving or maybe even crochet with whatever I've got from doing my advent. I've got no actual plans for it. So yeah, it probably turned into some sort of patchwork weaving, and I wound it up on the little again. Oh my god! Oh, calamity of errors. And then I wrapped that up in my. I wound it up on the little mini niddy noddy that came in the advent as well. So there's my 1st of December mini skein. I suppose it's a samplet really of my bats. So I'm quite pleased with that. It's got loads of little glittery bits in it and things like that. The light's awful. It's afternoon. It's dark outside. It's not stopped raining. So there we go. So there's the first days. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.